Hey, FlimsyLunchTray here, and welcome to World of Warships for our Saturday edition video, being an upgrade and commander build video on the Tier IX Premium German Battleship, the Pommern. And yesterday we did a Friday highlight where I featured more, not so much the brawling capability per se, but more of her rather large health pool for a Tier IX battleship in the game. Of course, Musashi sits on the top with I think over 97,000 hit points, but Pommern is like the top 5 here in the game in World of Warships currently, of having a large amount of hit points. And then, of course, her armor scheme, which we're going to get into here in just a moment. So, but starting off, what do I normally hit on here? Well, we talk about what type of battleship is Pommern, and you have brawling battleships, you have sniper battleships, and you have more mid-range battleships. Pommern is a mid-range to brawling range battleship. Usually I define mid-range as 12 to, let's say, 15 kilometers, and 12 and under would be the brawling. And that's really where Pommern is going to excel best when opportunities arise for her to push in with her 12 380mm guns, her torpedoes, and her secondary armament, as well as having a lot of the things that favor her in brawling scenarios. So she's a brawling battleship, can play mid-range, would be suffering to play because of how abysmal her Sigma and dispersion is if you tried to play her as a long-range battleship. It wouldn't be fun. It'd be very painful. So let's go ahead and talk about the armor scheme that you have on Pommern. So you actually have an icebreaker bow on Pommern, the 60mm on the forend armor belt, which then goes up to a 32mm. And you also see we have 150 here, so kind of protecting a little bit more of not being maybe perhaps cheeky and trying to get some shots in underneath into the citadel. We go to the stern. A few things going on here. 32mm, and then it's even a 50mm, and it's the same on the front here as you get closer into the deck, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then 90mm aft end armor belt. And then you can see, let's go ahead and talk about the deck. You can see there's a lot of different color shadings on the deck. So we got the 32mm to 50mm to 80mm back to a 50mm. So like if you were, let's say, a CV and you want to bomb a Pommern, like you'd be trying to go more for this area of the ship. So you can see the deck armor is a little more resilient around where your main battery guns are. And your vulnerability being, basically aiming for the smokestacks and just behind the conning tower beneath. And then down along the side, you have 145 armor belt, which then is a 235 armor belt, which then is a 300mm armor belt, which then another 300mm armor belt, and then a 38mm side plating for the torpedo protection. So there's a lot going on here in terms of the armor scheme. So like even if you're a destroyer, right? You're going to want to, if you try to want to pin the bow, you'd basically want to be going for the upper part of the bow and the stern to get pins on. So she is really a resilient battleship here at Tier 9 in terms of that armor scheme and helping her a little bit with the HE spam, so on and so forth. But start taking some things away, then you're going to be able to see the turtleback armor scheme here. So it's difficult to citadel a Pommern. It's not impossible, but just quite difficult unless you get the right angle. Otherwise, it's just going to bounce up into the hull superstructure of the ship and not reach through towards the citadel. So take a few more things away. You can actually see the citadel sits just above the waterline, having a 45mm sitting on it, and probably perhaps maybe even stronger beneath. And then hard to reach the citadel as well because you have 120. So again, when we're looking at the deck plating, right, and you go from that 80 to down to the 120, and then in the midsection of the ship we had that 50, then to 100. So you can see that it's more vulnerable to be able to try to punch through the center of the ship for you AP bombers, so on and so forth. But it is above waterline citadel, but it's going to be really hard to citadel just in general because of how the ship's armor schematics work. When we talk about the main battery guns, you have 400 on the front, 250 to then 200 on the side, 200 on top, and 380 on the back. So it's actually The front and the back of these turrets are the strongest, and some decent armor on the barbette. But it's pretty boxy design, so to speak, especially when you're looking at the front of these guns. So we'll talk about an upgrade you can take to kind of help protect the guns. And then I just want to point out where your torpedoes are to help you be a little more mindful. So these guys are exposed, they're out in the open. So when you have ships that are destroyers that are, you know, spamming high explosive on the side of your ship, it's quite likely that you can, even as a, like, let's say a cruiser destroyer player, intentionally aim for those torpedoes and knock them out before maybe a Pommern would be running up on you to torp you. So you can intentionally knock these out if you play it right. So let's talk about the modules. So there's no upgraded modules here. So these are again 12 380mm guns with the main battery mod 3 in the 6th slot. We've dropped the reload time down. I think it's 33 seconds, down to 39 seconds if I remember correctly. So it is 29. We have a 180-degree turn time of 34.5. So kind of maximum HE shell damage is 4,400. Maximum AP shell damage is 11,600. Your survivability is one of the strengths of the Pommern. You have 81,900 hit points. We'll talk about some other things like the AA here in a little bit. Your torpedoes, they have a reload time of 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds. Range, of 6 kilometers. A speed of 64 knots. They do maximum damage of 13,700 each, and then technical range of 1.3. So this kind of depends on, you know, you can do a drive-by with torpedoes on a battleship, and if he has enough health, it won't be enough to kill him. So you'll need your full broadside salvo in to help in addition to that. Your gunfire control system is 21.3 kilometers in terms of the main battery range. You don't get spotter plane. That could be one of the weaknesses or negatives about the ship, and not being able to reach out any further. Now again, the Sigma value is among the worst. I think it's in the top 5 if I remember right. Top 3? Yeah, I think top 3 of having the worst Sigma in the game for a Tier 9 battleship. So you don't play this as a long-range sniper. You just be very unsatisfied, very unhappy, and I don't even recommend building into the range. You know, we talk about like the gunfire control system mod 2. Propulsion, 165,000 horsepower, 31 knots, so not too bad for a Tier 9 battleship. More and more battleships are coming into the game, which seem to be faster and faster and faster. But with the Sierra Mike flag, we can get ourselves up to 32.6 knots. Moving along, there's a few options you could look at here. The top 2 in my mind, one would be the main armaments mod 1. This reduces the risk of your main battery and torpedo tubes becoming incapacitated by negative 20%. The main battery and torpedo tube survivability plus 50%. And then the main battery and torpedo tube repair time, if they do get knocked out, negative 20%. So I have preferred leaning towards the main armaments mod 1 in this scenario, just to help keep the main battery guns in action, but then also for the torpedoes, since they're kind of, you know, out in the open. Now, at the same time, you could easily go for the auxiliary armaments mod 1. Now, this is going to improve your secondary battery survivability by plus 100%, and then this also is going to buff your AA mount survivability by plus 100% as well. But Pommern plays pretty poor at the AA game, so just to briefly touch on that, continuous image here. So you only have long range and short range AA. You have no mid range AA. And you can see the long range continuous damage is 158. Your short range AA is 466. And you only have 5.2 kilometer range, and you know the typical 5.8, let's say, for battleships. And your AA rating on the ship is 73. So this isn't a ship you build into AA at all. But I would see this being more for the secondaries. Now, ironically, this ship doesn't have as high as secondary DPM as I thought it did. It's kind of mid-range. There are other ships that have a better DPM, but of course they don't have quite as good as that German secondary battery range, right, when we get into that. So this is something else you could take. So it's really up to you and what you would want to run in between these. The damage control party, I would just give it a special acknowledgement, I would say. if you really want to have your DCP lasting longer than what it already is. And I'm pulling up my calculator to give you the answer to that. It would be, you go up to 23.1 seconds in terms of your action time. So that is a possibility, but I just prefer kind of protecting my armament. So either you choose the main battery in your torpedoes or just the secondaries in AA. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. So, but again, I'd say these two are your two top choices. Pick as you see fit. If you don't have coal to make an investment to a special upgrade, then I'd say go for the Damage Control System Mod 1. This is going to reduce the risk of catching fire by -5%, risk of flooding -3%. If you do have the coal, then I would recommend going for the Hydroacoustic Search Mod 1. This extends your action time of your hydroacoustic search by plus 20%. So right now, just as we look at it, you're seeing 144 seconds action time, because I think without it's 120. Oh, it's always hard to try to keep these things straight in my head. And there's even another combat signal down here, which will help lengthen that time. So then we bump it up to 158.4 as an example. So I quite like that because this is the German hydro. I'll talk more about the hydro, but this is definitely worth the investment. It's 17,000 coal without a coupon. With coupon, I think it's 12,750. Let me just check that for you so I don't have to worry about writing a note in later. Yeah, 12,750, and this is just in the armory in the upgrades section. For the third slot, there's a couple things we could talk about here. Now, because Pommern is a brawling battleship with good secondaries, I've gone for the secondary battery mod 1. Now, I take the if we build into this secondaries with our combat signal, then also our commander, we have a 12-kilometer range with these secondaries, and I'll talk a little bit more about them. But because, you know, it's a brawling battleship, let's brawl, right? So let's go ahead and invest in the secondaries. So that's kind of the thinking here. So it reduces, extends your firing range by plus 20%, and reduces your maximum secondary battery shell dispersion by -20%. So for me, this is the real pure winner here. Now, you could talk about aiming systems mod 1, reducing the risk, or not reducing the risk, reducing your horizontal and vertical shell dispersion by -7%. But again, I mean, it's like a 1.4 sigma value. In most battleships, you're talking a tier 9, let's say, or rocking more 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, 2 even. So the lower the sigma value, sigma is like the chance of the shells landing in the center of the target where you're aiming. So the higher that number, the better. The lower it is, the worse off you are. So it's kind of like, do I make this turd shine a little bit more? But it's still a turd, right? When we're just talking about the accuracy of the main battery guns. Now, alternatively, and the third option here I could see is the main battery mod 2. If you wanted to improve that main battery traverse speed, because we said, right, it's 180-degree turn time of 34.5 seconds. But for me, I'd say the clear winner is going for the secondary battery mod 1. If you're playing German battleships with hydroacoustic search, torpedoes, turtleback armor scheme, like, you probably want to brawl in Pommern. In the fourth slot, I'd recommend the Damage Control System Mod 2. This is reducing your fire extinguishing time by -15%, your flooding recovery time by -15% as well. So like I featured in the Friday highlight, you know, we talked about her armor scheme, we talked about her tankiness, we talked about her having a lot of hit points as a tier 9 battleship here in the game. So building into her survivability with the Damage Control System Mod 2 is a really clear one in my mind when it comes to Pommern. Specifically here, sometimes like on Prinz Ruprecht and Schlieffen, like I run the prop mod, a little bit of a difference there, but here it's, in my opinion, it's much better to take this on Pommern. Yeah. Fifth slot, the Concealment System Mod 1 would be the first choice, I would say. Now we don't have concealment built into our commander, right? So if I show you a quick glimpse of our commander, we have no concealment. And I've taken concealment here on the fifth slot, and that puts us at 15.1. So being over 16 kilometers detect is pretty rough. Especially, you know, let's say early on in the game with a lot of the high tier ships, you know, a lot of them will spam salvos at you across the map. It helps you get into positioning a little bit earlier on in the game. But then, of course, when you're brawling, right? So then the concealment doesn't have as much of a value, which is one of the reasons I don't like taking it on my commander, because I need the points to build into the secondary and the brawling. But this is definitely, I think, as a standard option here in the 5th slot, it's quite good to be running. You can see detectability by air, 11.5 also. If you really didn't want to take Concealment System Mod 1, then I could see the value in the Torpedo Lookout system. It's assured acquisition range of torpedoes, 1.8 kilometers. And if I remember correctly, when you have Hydro on, it like extends the range out of you being able to detect torpedoes, if I remember right. I feel like I was listening to a WoW's community contributor talking about this, but maybe I'm completely wrong. I wouldn't put it past myself. It's been a long week. So advise in the comments if Flimsy's talking nonsense. 6th slot, the main battery mod 3 is what I've taken. Because of having 12 guns, usually wargaming is like, oh, we give you 12 guns, we give you 16 guns, then we're going to make you have a longer reload time, which is what they've done here on Pommern. So I'm pretty sure without it's 33 seconds, but with, we've got it down to 29 seconds, so I really want that. And because this ship doesn't have a lot of accuracy, so I want to be able to have a faster reload time, because I'm probably going to be more in close quarters combat and actions here with Pommern. You do take a hit on your main battery traverse speed by -13%, but I think it's still worth it. The only other really one I could see being worth it would be the Auxiliary Armaments Mod 2. Your secondary battery reload time is reduced by -20%. You get a buff to your AA damage, you get a buff to your AA shell explosions. So there's a bit of a helping hand there in terms of having to deal with planes. So there is some value to this skill. This depends on how much more deadly you're wanting to make Pommern in terms of her secondary capability, right? So if I was to take Auxiliary Armaments Mod 2, then what I would do is I'd drop Main Armaments Mod 1 and pick up Auxiliary Armaments Mod 1. Because I've chosen the secondaries, so to speak, over my main battery as an example. So then I would want to invest in them if I was going to run those two upgrades together in the 1st slot and 6th slot. Again, it's really going to be up to you and what you feel is best here. I do run this on some of my brawling battleships. I think, again, I'm going to reference Prince Ruprecht here. I run this just because Ruprecht has a higher secondary DPM than Pommern. So up to you. So those are really the two winners here. Talking more about the armament here, you have high explosive shells that have a 34% chance of causing fire on a target, 4,400 maximum damage. You pin 95 millimeter. Your initial shell velocity is 820 meters a second. Then looking at the AP, your shell velocity is the same, initial shell velocity, 820 meters a second. You have maximum damage to 11,600 with these. The fact that they are 380 millimeter guns does kind of help you a little bit if dealing with those broadside cruisers. You're not per se perhaps overmatching them as much when you start getting into the 406s and higher in the game. So there's, in terms of dealing with cruisers, pretty good, and you can still do the pretty chunked damage on broadside battleships. I think there was Illinois in the game yesterday. I think I did like over 16k on his broadside. No citadels, because it's a little bit of a cheeky armor scheme there with his citadels. Then you have torpedoes, 90-second reload time, 6-kilometer range, 13,700 damage, 64 knots, detectability range at 1.3. And then you do get the depth charge airstrike, and it's a 10-kilometer range, which is nice to see. 30-second reload time on 2 available flights and 1 attacking aircraft per flight. That drops 2 bombs in payload, which do a maximum damage of 4,200. As I just accidentally smacked my mic. Consumable wise, you have your standard damage control party. Because of one of the commander perks you've taken, our action time actually has gone from 15 to 16.5 seconds. Our cooldown time is 80 seconds, and we have unlimited number of charges here. Repair party plus 409. Consumable action time 30.8. That's again due to commander skill we've taken, otherwise it'd be 28 seconds. Cooldown time 80 seconds, number of consumables 5. If I take the India Delta combat signal, we can bump that up to 491 with the HP per second. So I regularly do that when I'm playing randoms, ranked, or if I were to take Pommern in clan battles as an example. Your hydroacoustic search, 4 kilometers range of detecting torpedoes, 6 kilometers of detecting ships. You can spot subs at a maximum depth 2 kilometers away from you. It has an action time that we've built into, being up to the 158.4 seconds as you see now. Cooldown time 120 seconds, and we get 3 of these hydroacoustic searches. Now we can take November Foxtrot if we would like here, and that would be reducing our cooldown time from 120 to 114, 80 to 76, 80 to 76 if you were to run that. Otherwise, when we're talking about our combat signals, let's just go ahead and demount all, and let's start over again here. We want to completely eliminate the risk of our ship's magazine detonating, so we take Julie Charlie when we're playing randoms ranked clan battles. We want to improve the fire extinguishing time and the flooding time, get those floods and fires out. Likely, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we might be ramming, so let's cause plus 50% when ramming an enemy, and we take negative 20% less when ramming an enemy. Let's build out the secondary range, right? Let's get that going. Let's take the India Delta, so we'll be able to heal back even more. Let's take the Sierra Bravo, so we have a longer hydro time. And then this is probably where it's going to land between you if you want to be a little bit faster, being 32.6 knots, or you want to have your hydro, you want to have your heal, you want to have your repair party come off cooldown time that much faster. So it really is up to you between these two and what you would like to take. Going into our commander, you can already see the overview of what we have built. I'm pretty sure, yeah, so I run this commander on Preußen. I think I also run him on the GK. Yeah, I think those are the, then I think I also run him on one of my lower tier German battleships, premium ones. So this is what I like running here. Now they changed some things, and I don't remember what update it was, because there might have been a little bit of a difference, 1-point skill that I would have run previously, but I'm quite fond of this build now that I have. So let me just walk you through my build, and I'll talk about maybe some other possible differences, options you could take. So preventive maintenance, it used to only cover your risk of modules becoming incapacitated by negative 30%. So reducing the risk of your main turrets, sonar, torpedo tubes, steering gears, and engine become incapacitated. But then Wargaming buffed the skill, and they added plus 15% to your secondary battery survivability and plus 15% to your AA mount survivability. So just because of having that buff to the secondary battery as well as the AA, that makes the preventive maintenance a little bit more alluring to have. In addition to our torpedo tubes being kind of like out in the open. So just reducing the risk of them being incapacitated, all the things work together quite well. That may have been in the past, I'd be like kind of maybe more torn between preventive maintenance, and that's the same thing like gun feeder from the switch between armor piercing and high explosive shells. But really, preventive maintenance tends to be the best 1-point skill to take for your brawling battleships at high tier. And then for a 3-point commander, they would take grease the gears. So our main battery traverse speed is plus 20%, right? Because again, it was like 34.5. So it would be worse if we didn't have this skill. It'd probably be like closer to 38 or maybe even close to 40. I don't know off the top of my head. Oh, excuse me, yawn. And then for a 6-point, it depends on, I always have this dilemma. I'm like, oh, do I want to go for adrenaline rush and fire prevention, or do I want to make my 10-point commander go ahead and invest him fully into the secondary? So that's up to you which way you go first. I would probably tell you, because we're talking about Pommern, tier 9 randoms and that, I'd probably go for the adrenaline rush first. Or you could even hybrid it. You could go long range battery secondary shells and then fire prevention, but that's the sake of simplicity. 6-point skill, 6-point commander, take adrenaline rush, main battery reload time, torpedo tube reload time, airstrike armament, secondary battery reload time, and a slight buff on our continuous AA damage. Helps as we begin to lose for each 1% of HP lost on our ship. So we get our main battery, down from 29 to 28 to 27.5 as an example, and then our secondaries, which have a pretty good reload time. You can see these 105s have a 2.9 second reload time. Our 150s reload 6.4. So we can get those reloading just a bit faster overall. And then fire prevention, because the reality is, as a brawling battleship, you're going to take a lot of HE fire. So I really wouldn't feel comfortable going into randoms without fire prevention expert. So for Pommern being tier 9, I would probably go this route first if you only had a 10-point commander. So you reduce the risk of catching fire by -10%, and your maximum number of fires is reduced from 4 to 3. If you're new to fire prevention, basically without fire prevention, you'd have 4 fires on your ship. 1 in the bow, 1 in the stern, 2 in the superstructure. Fire prevention takes these 2 fires, and you only have 1. So you're not taking double fire damage on your superstructure, just 1 fire damage only, which honestly is a lot better, and is going to help you be that tanky, higher hit point survivability tier 9 battleship here in World of Warships. After that, then I would say for a 13-point commander, go ahead and pick up your long-range secondary battery shells, pushing you up that plus 20%, which then ultimately, if you've gone with the build I've gone for so far, then we're at 12-kilometer maximum range for our secondaries. Great stuff. And then going for the for a 17-point skill commander, manual secondary battery aiming. Your secondary battery reload time is reduced by -10%. Maximum secondary battery shell dispersion, -10%. That's the permanent effect. That can be activated is over the course of 45 seconds of your secondaries firing on a selected target. Your accuracy will increase even better, or your dispersion reduced by an additional -50%. So you're basically getting 60% deduction in terms of your dispersion here on your secondary battery. That could be the same time. You could go for a 14-point commander, pick up this first, and then for a 17-point commander, pick up long-range secondary battery shells. It's interchangeable on how you'd want to approach that. And then for a 21-point commander, the emergency repair expert. This is extending your damage control party consumable action time by plus 10% from 28 to the 30.8 seconds. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. 15 seconds to your 16.5 seconds. You have unlimited number of charges on your damage control party. Great. Your repair party consumable action time goes from 28 to 30.8 seconds by that plus 10%. And you go from 4 heals to 5 heals. I'm typically a battleship player. It depends. I'm a player in general who likes to try to survive and live the last half of the battle, because that's usually when the big decisions occur and happen in the game. So that means I typically burn through a lot of my heals, 4 if not 5. So there's been some games that it's been the difference between defeat and victory just because I've had the 5th heal versus only having the 4. So this would be the standard brawling build, I would say here. Now, are there other things that I would do here? Well, I would say you could give up emergency repair expert and you could go for the close quarters combat. This is a can be activated skill, mind you. And then this is once you're within an enemy ship has been spotted within your ship's secondary battery firing range, which would be 12 kilometers. Then our main battery reload time is reduced by -10%. So then now our 29-second guns have almost 3 seconds shaved off of them, right? So we go from 29 to 26.1 seconds. Really nice. But we have to give up the emergency repair expert, or you could give up the manual secondary battery aiming and pick up the close quarters combat. Fire prevention really isn't the non-negotiable, so you just have to decide for yourself which of these 2 skills would you want to give up. Because the reality is, you have 12 guns. I think close quarters combat is definitely a very viable skill to take on Pommern. It just depends on will you the challenge I find at playing brawling ships and randoms at higher tier is typically the German battleship experience is the first half of the game. You tend to be sitting outside of the secondary battery range. You're kind of filling things out, letting enemy ships get whittled down. Doesn't mean you're not contributing to the battle or helping. I want to make that clear. But it's pretty punishing if you're a brawling battleship who pushes the first 5 minutes, right into the heat of the battle. You have to decide to do that wisely, or otherwise you just get focused down and you die quite quickly, right? Where it's the second half of the battle is usually where most the German battleships shine here in World of Warships. Now, there are games, like I've had games I've featured like with Schlieffen, where the enemy team leaves a hole open and you get to push in the very first half of the battle and make huge plays, right? That does happen, but generally speaking, you can get these battles where your team doesn't want to push up and support you and you'd be pushing into 5 enemy ships. So then you don't get the value of the close quarters combat, or maybe I get a little bit more of a help here with emergency repair expert and having longer action time on my heal, my damage control party, and I get a 5th heal. So it really is up to you, then you're like, well, I don't really care so much about main or secondary battery aiming, but I would be like, if you're going to be within secondary battery range, have your secondaries firing as much as accurately as possible, thus increasing your DPM, and then take close quarters combat. So I would just give up emergency repair expert and go with this block of these 4 skill points right here. Now beyond that, would I go with anything else? These 2 skills I would completely ignore. It's not worth the nerfs, or it's not worth how much damage you're going to be opening yourself up to and taking those 2 skills. I don't see going for a concealment on Pommern making sense. These 2 skills are much better than basic survivability in terms of Pommern's purposes. Priority target, and you'd have to give up something like grease the gears. You have vigilance, you take less damage from torpedoes, but you're picking up, extends it. This is what I was thinking about. Extends the torpedo acquisition range even while the hydraulic research consumable is active. Vigilance. That was what I was thinking of when I think I got a little bit confused talking about torpedo lookout system. I'm not sure if those 2 work together, but I was thinking of vigilance when I talked about that one earlier. My mistake. So if you were comfortable giving up grease to gears, then I would be like, vigilance kind of makes sense. You saw how many torpedoes I was dealing with yesterday here in World of Warships, and now that you have subs, right, and more battleships coming into the game having torpedoes, right, so I could see swapping that out for vigilance as an example. But otherwise, this is a pretty classic brawling build for a high tier brawling battleship here in World of Warships. So I've gone on long enough. If you have questions or something, just let me know in the comments. I've already gone over 33 minutes from the looks of things. So that being said, if you liked today's video, give a thumbs up. If you didn't, give a thumbs down. Subscribe if you do want to see more. If you're subscribed, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you to my Patreon supporters. Until next time, take care.